start this recording. All right. How's everybody doing?
All good.
Good. Quiet. Good. Quiet's nice. Silence, stillness. All right, so let's see who's new here. So far, I think Mauricio. You'd like
Yes,
to introduce yourself and share a little
sure.
bit about how you got here?
Yes, absolutely. Hi, everyone. This is Mauricio from Mexico, Mexico City. Born and raised here. Uh, I came here because I previously read Awaken to Your True Self, like when it was released two years ago. Andrew, is that correct?
Yes.
So I was reading that book. I finished the book. Life got in the middle, and my dad got sick and he recently passed, so I'm getting back to this work. I'm relearning stuff. I went through the foundational teachings again, and I'm going to read the book for the second time. I'm sure that I will find more valuable things there. So uh, I'm again in the journey and trying to awaken myself and feel.
Well, it's great to have you here. I've seen you uh, in some of the emails and the peripherals over the past few years. Um,
That's correct. Yeah, also in the business group that met, we met in that business group in consulting. So
yeah.
everything started from there because I saw your book, and then I went to review what it was all about. Then I found your book, and then I started reading, and I liked it a lot. So that's where everything started in the other group actually, in consulting.
Okay, great.
Yeah, because I'm a student from Sam Ovens and
Yeah.
all of.
Yeah, Hannah knows Sam.
Yeah, yeah, that's where I met you for the first time, and then I read your book.
Great. Well, it's wonderful to have you here. Um, uh, I hope that we can be of support during this time uh, of your father transitioning, and
Thank you,
um, you're welcome. Thanks for showing up.
thank you, Andrew.
You're welcome. And I know, David, I've seen you also on YouTube and here and there a bit. It's great to have you here. Um, who else? Elaine. All right.
Hi.
Hi. You weren't here last time.
No, I wasn't.
It's
Yes.
good to see you. You're one of my private clients. Um,
Yes.
why don't you share a little bit about what brings you here and
Uh, I guess I just found myself really stuck and needed to figure a lot of things out, and through, your work and your book and doing weekly calls with you, I keep getting breakthroughs, and even today I have solid confirmation that it's working, because it my life just feels better, and I'm doing what I always needed to do, but I lacked boundaries. I lacked uh ability to really stand up to people, or and just to have all of that come together in one day, it makes me really happy, and helps me on my journey to, want to do more and continue with this, because I see the results.
And how did you find the book? I think you're
Oh,
probably the only one that didn't find it on Amazon.
yes, my mother-in-law gave it to me for my 40th birthday. And
She probably
I
found it
just,
on Amazon though.
yeah, I couldn't. At one time, she said she found it on a website, and then later on, it was like she was looking for something else, and that popped up, and I was actually on her mind. She said she was like, "I want to help Elaine," and then she saw your book, and she said, "Oh, maybe that'll, you know."
Little
So
did she know. Yeah.
I know. Yeah.
Well, it's great to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Anybody else? First timers, people hiding in the background. Now I see Holly. Holly, you're here. You were here last time. Julie, we saw you. Okay, great. Anybody have anything they'd like to share before we take a look at some of the pre-submitted questions? Remember, this is our second time. We're all figuring this out, seeing what's going to serve you guys the best. See in this kind of beta test of a small intimate group and an opportunity to maybe go a little bit deeper than we will in probably coming months and years. So anything that anybody would like to share, any questions about the book? Yeah, go for it. Yeah, you could just speak. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Andrew. Just a quick question. So can we submit questions in advance for the call?
Yeah, so last time last time we're all just figuring out what's going on the first time, and I thought having some questions ahead of time can prevent, people don't have to feel on the spot or anything like that. We'll have some stuff that's ready to go. So I think we have about maybe 4 or 5 questions. But if there's anything hot for anybody right now, we can talk about that as well.
Okay, thanks.
Nope. Right.
I was going to ask a question, Andrew,
Yeah.
about your somatics. I've read that in the book, and then I seen some stuff on YouTube before this Awaken started about moving your body and moving forward. And I really like that. That's what drew me to your. After reading the book, I watched from your website. The one about synsomatics.
Yep.
And I watched some of the videos of people and giving and receiving. And it really, really made a lot, parts of the book mean a lot as well. Then when I read some of that, I'm near the end of the chapter. And I
Can
never
you,
actually finished
excuse
the
me,
last chapter fully.
can you say that last part again?
Yeah, I was thinking, of the giving and receiving, and your book had that in it, but I hadn't completed the last chapter fully when you were talking about all of that. So I've been going over that today again, this week really.
So how was that for you doing the embodied story exercise?
Yeah, I find that well, the ones you put on YouTube recently, the ones where you walk your body forward round in like
The
a circle.
meditations, yeah.
Yeah, the meditations, I was trying those, and it is so true. The body just won't move that way or something. It just moves different. And then gradually my body did, click in and go, oh, right, yeah, we can move that way. It's like there was something interrupting it from moving forward. And, and I was so confused. I was like, oh, goodness, my body won't move for me. And it was really odd to see that there's something, taking over and you taking that control back is something that really meant a lot. Yeah.
Interesting. Were you able to get a sense of what that was?
I think I was still in a bit of fear. It's still something to do with fear with me. Going through a lot of like relationship issues at the moment, where give and take and boundaries and I am still a wee bit mixed up about, what I'm willing to give. It's like I'm frightened to give too much out. I think that's still something I'm working on because I couldn't fully. I tried to do the same speed both ways, but I think I was trying to control it too much. No, I think you always try to just over control, when you can't just let the body take its time. So when I was reading there about in your book, the last sort of chapters about somatics, understanding that, the feeling and what you're attaching to things, you have to try and work out what emotion it is. As you say, once you can define what you're feeling and really let yourself feel it, it should be able to in some way release
Yeah.
parts of it. Yeah. So I'm still working on it.
Yeah, it's even part of in the chapter. That's what we're doing. All right. You got the book. So in the chapter, Dragons and Their Treasures, for the shadow work, it's really the same process. The A5 process, I'm sorry it has such a terrible name, but at least you'll remember there's 5 A's. It was like, I got nothing creative for this one. Let's just make it obvious. But it's step 1, awareness. Step 2, acknowledgement. Step 3, allowance. Step 4, annihilation. And step 5, access. And some of these, right, like the annihilation part, very much around shadow material, but you can even think of that as, even without that annihilating feeling, there's a certain, after you surrender, there's that kind of disillusion, right? There's that certain dissolving, there's that giving up, there's that it's that space after allowing and surrender. When you're doing shadow work, it can feel like annihilation, right? It feels like something you're just this is it, all right. But if it's not this sort of intense thing, after you allow, there is that it's just this kind of space, and then after you move through that, then you have the access. So that sort of process of having the awareness. So you're doing the movement, right? You have the awareness that there's something here, right? So most of us, before having just the awareness to have the awareness, right? Mindfulness, we don't even realize it's a thing, right? You're just walking and you're like, oh, my arm just doesn't move. You're just walking with one arm. And then you realize, oh, there's something there. And then the second step is acknowledgement, right? You're owning it, right? That's kind of the taking responsibility part. And then allowance is that place, when you're spending all this time fighting against it, butting heads, trying to fix it. Maybe you're trying to annihilate it, right? I try to annihilate it. Not allowing it, right? Another word is acceptance, right? Allowance, acceptance, surrender. And then the annihilation, then after that is access. So in the movement, that allowance is going to be, so when we do somatics work, let's say, Julie, like for you, what would come up is fear, right? Maybe boundaries. And you don't want to give up control. Maybe you're over controlling, just as an example here. It's like, all right, well, allow it. So allow yourself to control, right? Allow yourself to go into that place as part of the process, and that allowance through the movement of your body, or a willingness to go into that place that you've been resisting, that's that place where it moves into the annihilation. There's also, you could also even think about it as penetration, right? Because after you allow something, right, there's that penetration. If you're fighting it and you're not allowing it, it can't penetrate. So that's pretty cool. I never really looked at it that way, that annihilation, you know, there's some kind of parallel to penetration. So, okay, so there's another part of this too. The allowance and the annihilation and penetration part can go in both directions. So what I mean by this is you can either penetrate the story, right? It can be you going into it or surrendering to it and it coming into you. Now, I've had both work for me. Certain times I'm like, all right, I'm going to go into it. I'm going to face it. I'm going to have the courage. I'm going in, right? Imagine stepping through a threshold. That's the masculine. That's the yang way to do it. And then the yin, the feminine, right, is to let it annihilate you. And so I put it more in the annihilation phrase here because when in this chapter we're talking about shadow work, most people, we've been fighting it already. We've been trying to get rid of the shadow. We've been trying to do that. And so the approach of surrendering to it and letting yourself face death when it feels like death tends to, I find, be a better metaphor approach or whatever than let's go in and fight it and go in and kind of thing. So that's a bit of the process that you can take this and apply it to the movement and say, all right, after you've done the awareness, the acknowledgement, the allowance, the annihilation, right? So step 5 is access. That's when you regain access to all of those resources that were tied up when all that other stuff was happening. So for example, if it's around control, boundaries, giving and receiving, if you're fighting it and you're out of relationship with these things, when you actually go in and own it and the stories collapse, you now have better access to giving and receiving with boundaries and lessons and learnings. Like, it's been my experience that with every healing is also a resource, whether that's a lesson, wisdom, download, an insight, an intuition, clarity. There's always something that we regain after healing. Makes sense.
Yeah,
Yes.
that makes sense. Yeah, because the victimization, I think it was in some ways I'm a victim. I can't hold on to that. The story of me, this is what happened. I can't do that because of that. So as long as you get rid of those, then it frees it up. There's an opening that there's another possibility. Yeah.
And when you're being a victim, you're giving your power away. So when you
Yes.
stop being a victim, you reclaim that power.
Yes. And you're more given to others then, as you say, because you have more of that openness.
Yeah.
Yeah, gradually.
Yeah. And then with the boundaries, right, you also learn, oh, I'm abandoning myself when I'm overgiving. Okay.
Yeah. So honoring yourself and your boundary, then putting a boundary of some type at points that are needed for you. There's things you do need, which I never thought of before. I thought I don't need anything. I'm okay.
Yeah.
But you now find out that, well, I need that. That makes me feel better if that's there. But I'm not using it as a fear mechanism maybe anymore. It's just I just need it to make me survive. Life.
Well,
And I
that's
don't think it's
kind
a
of a
bad thing
definition
for
of a
now.
need. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then,
yeah.
and we grow up and we learn, like, my needs aren't as important as somebody else's. This is where we start martyring ourselves, and all these things start showing up. And then we also start confusing needs with wants and preferences. It's like safety is a need. Love is a need, right? Touch is a need. But if you say, I can only be touched at 11:32, this place on my face, in this way, with this music playing, that's not a real need. You get to see there's so much control. There's all this other stuff going on with it. And so oftentimes if we start learning the lingo and we're still caught up in the ego, we can hijack it and be like, oh no, you're not meeting my needs because it's 11:12 and it wasn't exactly how I needed it. And then you also have to work with, okay, well, meeting the person where they're at. It's like, you don't just just say that's all wrong. You have to go through the layers and say, well, what's it really about, right? So in that example, right, maybe it's fear of surrendering, letting go. That's usually what it is. When we have to control and everything be just how we need, it's not, we don't have a trust in life. We make it mean stuff. So there's all these other things that can surround it. But if we hide out in either direction, having hyper crazy needs, or saying we don't need anything at all, there tends to be a lot of dysfunction and pain and suffering in that.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah,
Great, thanks.
yeah,
Elaine,
that's
you
a
were
great
going to
way
say
to see it.
something?
Yes, when you spoke of the access, and you said it created space, would you consider that like feeling like a hole in your heart, after you have gone through and annihilated and done all the steps, um would you consider it to be like feeling empty inside, like you have something that you got out of you? Because I sort of experienced that going through one of your, after talking to you, and then I did the exercise, and then 2 days after that, I just had this hollowness in my chest. And but it felt like I got rid of something and it was just space, created, but it did feel kind of like an emptiness.
Great question. There's a lot. There's a lot here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
So
I found that interesting how you said it created space. And I wonder if maybe that was what I was feeling, thinking it was emptiness, but it actually just kind of, you know, created more space within me.
yeah, it could be a few things. So if I go to what's the sort of philosophy here, it's going to be wholeness, right? So the idea that we're getting rid of something. Okay, so this is tricky because it's multidimensional here, not in an esoteric way. This is where things can get confusing if you're looking at them apples to apples. So when we look at our stories, when we look at our patterns, our behaviors, our filters, our distortions, you've read in the book, this is about subtraction, right? Right from the beginning. This is not about a doing, but an undoing.
Yeah.
So there is this element of subtraction. Now, how do you also feel when it's like, all right, there's this poison in me, or this demon, or just this pain, and you're carving it out and getting rid of it? Again, not saying this is what you're saying. I'm just kind of walking through the logic here. Okay, well then when that's gone, just like a tumor, there's going to be an abscess, right? Whatever that is, a hole.
Yeah.
So that, if I think of our idea as that we're whole and complete, there's nothing wrong with us, and we're just subtracting all this junk and stuff that's on top of us, the journey is going to be subtraction, but also moving forward into our inherent, innate worthiness. So we don't want to go back in time, but we want to move forward into who we've always been, right? And it's a little word salady, but that's kind of what we're doing. And the reason of that is because it's easy to say and fawn and want for the past. Oh, I remember the time I was so happy, or this utopia or Garden of Eden time. We're trying to get back there. This doesn't work. We're always moving forward, right? The universe is expanding, so we have to align with going forward, while also understanding the healing is through the subtraction of what isn't true and real to reclaim that inherent wholeness. So this is where I want to start off with to answer this question of the sort of philosophical way of understanding it. Okay, so with that, like I said, there's a lot here. So with that said, there's also an element of, all right, well, you've subtracted. Maybe it's a burden. Maybe you've just been carrying around a burden. Maybe it is anger you've held on to for decades. Now it's gone. Okay. Well, if this is something that's been in there the whole time, festering and been a weight for you, when you heal that, okay, it might feel empty inside. Something that used to be there is no longer there. So kind of setting that up of understanding that, okay, that's a possibility, but then there's also the addiction possibility, that we're so addicted to our stories. We're so used to it. It feels like home, right? So it's like, I've always had this, and now that I don't, I feel empty inside. I don't feel like me anymore, even though all that happened is that you've healed something. So I just wanted to put out a few of those sort of things and see what's sticking for you. Which of those feels like what it felt like.
I feel like with the volume of what I, processed and went through, that it was just kind of out of me, this festering stuff, this people pleasing, and it just was a lot of who I was. And so when I got it out and, penetrated it, and it there was an emptiness within me.
And so
I think,
what is your relationship to that emptiness? What's the feeling, the judgment? How are you, like, does it feel good? Like, is it, how are you relating to it?
I guess I felt good, but I also kind of wondered, I hope something good is filling in there, or,
Okay, so all right, so that's a little different. So that feels like, yeah, that feels more of like a mechanical.
I just felt this hollowness in my chest, and but
So yeah, so this is the interesting thing, is that it's your relationship to this that's really important, because we established all of these sort of ground premises. If that hollowness could be one of two things, right? It could be something that you now have the space inside of you that
right.
can breathe and show up in, or it could feel like I'm less than I was before. And so when you said, I hope it feels in with something good, that's just what made me think it, which one it was. Go ahead.
Yes. I did, I just felt better getting rid of, feeling like I was not hanging on to all this stuff. So the emptiness definitely lent space to me, so.
And so what's your relationship with that space?
Um, in the beginning, I was a little worried about it, but after today, I feel like it allowed me to grow and not be a people pleaser. So it's working.
Great. And what's the
Good.
problem?
I was curious about
Okay.
the space thing, Yeah, I don't want to take all the time.
Okay, great. What was that helpful? Did it bring some clarity?
Yes. Yeah. I was just curious if that's the feeling of space.
Yeah, I mean, right, it can be. It depends what the relationship is. Because you can have space and one person feels like they've just lost themselves and they feel empty inside, right? We all know the feeling of feeling empty inside. Like we're just
Yeah.
fucking empty. But then there's also the feeling of, oh, I'm light and airy and there's all this spaciousness inside. It could,
Yeah.
it could be the same thing for, two different things for the same person.
Right. Okay. Get it.
Or the same thing for two different people, both of them actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, depending on the relationship.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Go for it. Yep, you. No?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So from what I remember in the first reading, I read that some people or many people tell themselves bad stories, and that's one of the reasons for the suffering. And then they enter the personal development and they tell themselves, or we tell ourselves, a better story. But at the end of the day, it's a story, a better story, but a story at the end. So I told this to a coach once, because you say that we can remove the story to meet reality as it is, right? Without stories.
Yeah.
And then I said this to a coach, and he said to me, you cannot be story free. So my question to you is, can we be story free, or we cannot be story free? That's my question.
Good question. I have a question for you. Why do you want to be story free?
Just to, I mean, my logic response is to meet reality as it is, but I'm not sure if I will be able to be completely story free. For me, or to me, story free is like I'm illuminated. I have arrived to illumination where I'm story free. I think that I can tell myself better stories, but I'm not sure if I can be totally story free, meeting reality as it is. That's fine.
Okay, great. So let's say you got 1,000 stories. Just so we have an easy number. What if you let go and stop telling 999 of those? Would you feel like you're still stuck? Would you feel like nothing? Would you feel like you failed? Would you feel like it's impossible?
I would feel lighter
Okay.
holding just one story instead of instead of thousand stories.
Yeah. So I mean, that's kind of, I think that's a much more useful thing than a theory. I've never met anybody that has 0 stories 100% of their life. It doesn't mean that it gives you an excuse to just keep doing. It's like nobody has 0% of anything.
Mhm.
I think it's much more useful to say, all right, well, these 100 stories I've believed my whole life aren't true, and I can stop them. And by stopping them, I'm going to be in a lot less suffering. Rather than, oh, I can't ever get to perfection, so what's the point? That's the place that I want to steer away from, is that there's a certain perfection element, and why bother if you can't ever do it? So a great question. I just think, I feel that there's a more important element behind it. So it's like, get to the one story left, and then we'll have this conversation again.
Yeah.
Until then, I mean, you're just, it's just worrying about something that's never going to happen.
Would you say that striving to have 0 stories would be also suffering?
I say a lot of people that would strive for that would. Yeah. It's
They are looking for perfection, right?
yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like another way to not, like, that's the ego. The ego asks that question, right? Or has that answer to your question. It's like saying, what are all the books I need to read to be happy? It's like, well, just stop and just be happy.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a process to that. But yeah, there's that feeling of, it's kind of like a lot of spirituality stuff where it's very faith-based. It's like, well, if you can't prove this 100%, why even do it? It's not the point. The point is the faith. It's not in the proof. The evidence isn't the proof. I mean, the point, the evidence and the proof isn't the point. The faith is the point. And the faith isn't even about the thing you're having faith in. The faith is in what happens to you. So what happens to you when you get neurotic about, I have to clear all of the stories forever and then live this story-free life in perfect totality forever, versus, oh, I'm going to be on this journey, and every day and every step of the way, I'm going to keep subtracting and subtracting, and there's going to be some days where I can pop in and I'm there. And then maybe life happens again and I'm chopping wood, carrying water. This also goes back to the part in the book where I talk about letting go of the pressure of doing it all at once. It has that similar feeling of everything. You can't be story free. Okay. But you can still be in a lot less suffering.
Right.
Yeah. So it's like, let's get there first. Let's meet up in however many years when you get down to one story. You're like, Andrew, man, I've been doing this. I just got this one story left. Man, that blue sky, man, I just can't get over that blue sky. I mean, I know it's reflecting off the water and I just can't, just can't do it. Let's meet up then, and then we'll figure it out. Until then, enjoy a life of 99.9% less suffering.
Yeah, that is true. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Anybody else? All right, so let's get to some questions. Let's take a look here. All right. Chi asked the first question. We're just going to go in order. How does an avoidance of intimacy relate to my business? I don't know. You tell me. How does it relate to your business?
Okay, so for me, this was inspired by the clip you posted about masculinity and intimacy, and noticing that I used to move through the world mostly in my masculine energy before awakening or attempting to awaken, and before working with you. And putting that together with the question I asked last week, or what was revealed in the first session, being that in my business, I hadn't actually made a true choice. And I thought I'd made a choice, but it wasn't a true choice. And I remember one of the things that you said was, so what is the choice that you're making? And so I kind of sat in contemplation with that during the week. And what came up for me was choosing to avoid heartbreak, which is weird in the realm of business. It's weird to talk about heartbreak in the realm of business. But for me, the business is so intimately, it's so personal to me, right? The business is so personal to me. And doing the business actually requires me to be vulnerable, because I'm talking about things at the energetic level, which it's a language most people don't speak, right? We're so used to speaking about things at the concrete level of things. It's just a far cry from anything I've done in my past. So even just showing up in my business feels vulnerable to me. And so I guess I was just kind of wondering what the interplay was with that. Is this keeping in mind that I thought I'd made a choice, then finding out I didn't make a true choice? It just feels like there is, and then hearing you speak, it feels like there's almost like an avoidance of penetration, in that I'm not making a choice. It's like my business is calling me to do something that I'm refusing to do because my walls are still up, you know?
Yeah. Are you willing for your heart to be broken?
That's the question. That is the question.
Yeah.
And so when you were just speaking about annihilation, right? And that's kind of what it reminded me to, is like, or rather not annihilation, to be vulnerable, you have to be willing to have your heart be broken. It comes with the territory. And that just dropped in for me as you were speaking earlier today. It's like, you know, I don't think, at least maybe I wasn't willing to have my heart be broken. I wasn't even aware that was what was going on for me until I really sat with it. And so, yeah, that is the question. And even now, as you're asking me the question, I kind of feel like the swirly sort of like anxiety energy in me right now, just because I want to say yes, but my body is like, no, you're not.
Yeah.
No, you're not.
So what would the heartbreak be? Would it be with clients? Would it be in failing? What's the would it be in not being able to achieve it because this is your dream? What would be the heartbreak?
You know, for me, it would be the repeat. There's a story here, right? The story is, I don't get the things I really want in life. Like the things I really, really want never turn out, never pan out. That's the story. And so when this thing about being heartbroken came up, that was the story that came along with it. And again, I'm going to sound like a broken record here and say that this is a story that I thought I'd put to bed, but the story is still coming up. But the story is still coming up in this way. So it makes me think, well, so the next question was, how do I penetrate this? You know, how do I penetrate this wall that I seem to have up?
So this is a perfect example of what I was saying earlier, of the time to penetrate or to be penetrated. Because this is about your walls, and because it's about you being heartbroken, this is the place for, I feel, being penetrated. Because there's a surrender in that.
Mm-hmm.
And if we get really, it's a bit more advanced, but there's no difference. Penetrated, giving, receiving, it's really all the same. You can't have one without the other. It's called mutual arising, right? Yin yang, masculine, feminine. It's like saying, can you only have men? And that's why this whole like, oh, life without men, life without women, it just doesn't make any sense. It's like how do you draw a square circle? It just doesn't make, it's just not, it's a nonsense question. Because if you understand there's nobody else out there, and the space, and you're being penetrated. I'm sharing that with you because you a bit more advanced, and I think you understand this. The reason I say it is, while we're here in kind of normal world operating, being able to delineate the difference of penetrating and being penetrated can be very helpful. Because if you're going in one direction, it's not working. What do? Do it backward, do the opposite.
Yeah.
So what would you need to be penetrated by for this to do whatever it needs to do?
Yeah, it's a great question. One, I guess I'm gonna take a take an I guess take an idea from take a suggestion that you came up with, which is to go into the heartbreak. Let's assume I do get heartbroken. Like, just go into a reality where I give it my all, I bust my ass, yada yada, and I do get heartbroken, and allow that to penetrate and see if that allows me to penetrate it fully. But I'm gonna go out on a limb and say I don't think that's gonna penetrate it fully. It feels like something more here that needs to be seen that I can't quite get at.
What's the meaning you give it? You know, what do you make that mean about you?
Being heartbroken?
Well, failing at the business. You know, you have the story, but that's just the story of the thing. What's the story about you?
That I'm powerless, that I can't actually create the life that I want.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, you feel that's much more potent.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so then for here, right, this would be the allowance part. And that's the part you don't want to allow, right? I don't want to feel powerless. Well, this is where you let yourself go into that powerlessness and see what's there and, you know, reclaim that.
Yeah.
Surrender to the powerlessness. You're going to find all your power.
Boom. Thank you.
There you go.
Very
You're
helpful.
welcome. All right. Next question here. This is a new format for me. Usually in the paid programs, the group work, there's a lot of like feedback. There's a lot of other things going on. So this kind of just question answer thing is seeing how it goes. I think it's going so far. Holly says, "Are you here, Holly? Let me just make sure you're still here." Okay. Yeah, I see you here in the participants, Holly. How do I discern between whether I'm avoiding life or allowing adequate space to pass through grief? Great question. So, what's the difference between allowing and avoiding? Wow, this is great. Okay. But you see here, even in that, how the ego is so insidious. It's like allowing space, avoiding grief. Well, you're using allowing and avoiding. Let's get practical for this. One indicator is anxiety. If you feel yourself getting more anxious over time, not in the moment, because if you're in the moment of the anxiety, that is going to feel more normal and natural than going silent and still. That's going to acutely raise the sensation of anxiety. But by doing that, that'll eventually lower it. But if over time, like say throughout the day or throughout the weeks, if you find yourself more anxious, more distracting yourself, anything that kind of resembles anxiety in all the different forms it can manifest, that's going to tell you that you're more in avoidance, because that's what anxiety is. Anxiety is an avoidance of feeling, essentially. A little bit more to it, but I say this in the book, and I've done some meditations on this. So that would be the first practical indicator. Another one on the other side is if you're allowing in the grief, that that over time you feel more present. You're not necessarily going to feel better in the short term. It's going to probably feel worse in the short term because you're feeling the grief. You're in that pain. So if you notice things like compassion for yourself, grace for yourself, if when you're in the grieving, there's actually movement, right? You're not just numbed and checked out. There's movement, there's breath, tears, crying, emotion, energy and motion. Something is moving in the system. You see all the movements I'm doing? It's in the system. Where the other movements are like this, right? It's all this external, avoidant, anxious kind of stuff to dissipate it. So those are some really good practical indicators to know, okay, I'm avoiding. It's going to result in this sort of thing. I'm actually versus I'm allowing myself to be in the grief. And you mentioned the spaciousness too. Is there that gentleness? Is there that permission? Because when you're anxious and avoiding, there's not that permission. It doesn't feel the same of, okay, I just cried for 2 days straight. I'm just going to chill today. Okay. But if it's like 3 months and I'm watching Netflix for 8 hours a day, every day, then that's 100% avoidance. So those contextual clues, the feeling under it, the results of how you're going over time. One last one would be the dissociation or numbness, right? The more dissociated and numb and kind of checked out of life you're getting, 100% avoidance. If you feel you're more present, even if there's more pain, even if it sucks, like this fucking sucks, this is worse, I want to numb out, but I'm going to be in it, that is more into the feeling. So you have to feel it to heal it. And so, grief, it's just giving yourself space. That's what actually feeling the grief is, giving yourself the space to be in that pain.
I think one of the tricky things for me about it is that I do have a lot of anxiety, but I think it's more related to feeling like my capacity is not the same as it was before. And, still having to adult and do the things and, feeling like I need to pressure myself to do those things.
Okay, so what's the question?
So I guess it seems like that's a fitting way to experience the anxiety. Obviously there's going to be anxiety in certain circumstances where it feels like that's where it should be. But I don't think it's necessarily anxiety around avoidance of grief or avoiding life necessarily. So I'm not sure if that does feel like it is a good fit or if it isn't, if that's what you mean by anxiety.
Yeah.
Being present.
I found whether or not we think it's true or not, if you just kind of assume it and take it on, that all anxiety is an avoidance of feeling, and you understand that anxiety is a sensation as the result of avoiding feeling something rather than its own emotion. I haven't seen that in the technical medical literature, but every single client and myself that has taken that on and applied it, it's always worked. So it may not necessarily be exactly the thing that's related to it, but it's never a bad question to ask, am I avoiding feeling something right now?
Okay.
And with grief, right, when we're actually in pain, we don't want to feel it. Like this is the whole point of the whole thing, is that, yeah, of course we don't want to feel it. This is why you see when people experience things like grief or heartbreak, there's these really heavy things, and they don't have the strategies to deal with it, or they have all these traumas on top of it, or they have all these other things that happen, right? Like you're saying, you have all these other responsibilities, creates all that pressure. Oftentimes, because we don't give ourselves permission to feel and it be okay to feel that and trust the feeling, it starts accumulating. And then you start having, compounded things. So I know it's never the answer anybody wants, but it's always the thing that I found work is to let yourself feel it and give yourself permission to feel it and find a safe place to feel it. If you need to make that space for yourself, take time off of work. If you can't do it, while you're going to bed, you just find the opportunities to let yourself process it. And if you literally are like, I just can't at all, then give yourself permission to not. Because the beating yourself up, I'm not saying you are, I'm just giving examples. The putting more pressure on yourself to do it is just going to compound it and just make it worse. It's like judging yourself for judging. It's like you're just never gonna get out of it. So having, if you're someone who is just very wishy-washy, having a little bit more yang energy of, no, we're gonna sit here and face it. That'll work. If you're somebody who's just like, oh, I have to do it, then the opposite is gonna be more helpful.
Yeah, I think this feels like a really different kind of role because I typically am pretty type A person, and this feels a lot like slowing down in a way that is kind of manatee speed. So it's just very unfamiliar, and the whole concept of avoidance of life and the experience of grief are fairly new for me. So it's finding that middle path is very difficult at times. So I definitely think I need to sit with the experience of that anxiety and see what it's trying to tell me.
Yeah. Were you there on the insight timer when we did the slow down one?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, slowing down. It's gonna feel like molasses. The more molasses, oh, this is agonizingly slow. Right? The more you go into that, the more you're gonna go batshit crazy, but the more it'll be helpful for you. It's you one extreme to the other. Because if you're type A, it's gonna be like, and then so the remedy is bringing more of that yin. Yeah. But because we're so used to it, it's so normalized that just a little bit of it just. So hope some of that was helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, just give yourself that space and time, space and breath, space and feeling. All
Baby
right,
steps.
we're at the end of the hour. Any last words from anybody? Anybody want to share what maybe they learned something, maybe they got something from themselves listening to somebody else? Maybe like
One thing I've found interesting about the grief is, I'm a very dissociated person, and I lost my mom 2 years ago, and I all of a sudden, after we buried her, I needed to go scream. Like I just felt it, like I am going to scream, and I just went out and screamed my heart out. And for me, it actually woke me up. I guess it was such a big thing that it woke my system up to, crying, and I think, led me on the path to like get help from you. So I just found that interesting, just thinking about that. I just, that I didn't shut down for that as well. It's just a miracle.
Yeah, sometimes we need those experiences to wake us up.
Maybe.
Sometimes a heartbreak, sometimes a rock bottom.
Yeah.
You just don't get the fucking message until it's
Need the 2x4.
yeah, sledgehammer I need sometimes. David, anything you'd like to share? Hannah? Nicole? Oh, bye-bye.
Oh, my phone is, I have to do this on my phone. I just wanted to thank everybody for sharing. I feel like it's interesting hearing everybody's stories because I think I have a question or something in my mind that I want to share. And then someone says something, I'm like, oh, I totally know. Oh, I've felt that before. Oh, so it's actually been really helpful to hear other people's stories and kind of your answers and feedback and elaborating on parts of the book. So I'm just kind of enjoying taking it all in. So thank you.
Great, you're welcome. Thank you.
I had just was just messaging with Holly in the chat here about perhaps what she was avoiding feeling was the overwhelm, which is something that I have certainly experienced in my life. And I think in that process, allowing ourselves to get more expansive with what we could be wanting to avoid, like it may not be an obvious emotion. It could be the acknowledgement of a story or a belief of, I'm not good enough. I'm not, for me, I have this I can't do it fast enough. There's something like my productivity can't be, some sense of inadequacy. So beyond just, maybe grief or anger or this kind of thing, could be an avoidance of feeling some belief or story too, not wanting to acknowledge that it might be truth.
There's also the flip side of something positive. Positive, right? So it doesn't always have to be a shadow. It's like avoiding praise, avoiding peace. Like if you're always overwhelmed, it shows there's an addiction there. You could be avoiding peace. I work with clients, some of them are very, very successful, will make a lot of money, lots of businesses, and they don't want to stop. They live in being overwhelmed because it's not to be or not to be, it's to do or not to be. To do or not to be. Discovered that kind of phrase on a call with my client, and it was just, it's like, yeah, if I'm not doing, then I don't exist. Like it went that existential. So sometimes it's the peace, sometimes it's the stillness, sometimes just being there with yourself. Like sometimes we hate ourselves, we don't like ourselves, and we're doing everything we can to just be with ourselves. Look out into the world, look out into culture. So that's kind of an in-between one. And then there's also just like stories of, I don't deserve praise. I don't deserve having somebody take care of me, right? So even wonderful things that if we stopped avoiding them would be wonderful that we want, there can be stuff there too. So great point, Hannah. I just wanted to add on to that sometimes it's things in what you said about expanding, and it's not the obvious things. Sometimes it's even the things we would never think we're avoiding. We'd want to avoid love, intimacy. Who here's ever avoided intimacy, right? That's what we all want. But why? Yeah. David, you were going to say something, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, I was just gonna say on a different note, it's a good opportunity for me just to observe myself fidgeting and in group situations, maybe some of my avoidant tendencies as well, just being on this Zoom call.
Oh, you're getting bonus points here. Self-awareness about how you're showing up here. Great. What are you finding out? Anything you want to share?
Just my self-consciousness in general. I mean, it's something I'm aware of, and just when it comes up, it's just telling me that I'm avoiding those feelings by fidgeting. So
Great.
it just helps me get back to facing it, I guess.
Yeah. Great. Wonderful. One of the things that you can do this if you like or not. One of the things that I've had a few clients where I've suggested this and it changed their life, literally. If you find yourself fidgeting, just stay still. Like, just put your hands on your legs, put your feet on the floor, and just don't move them. It's going to bring up all sorts of stuff. So you can do it in small doses. You build up to it. I did. I remember the first time I said, all right, I'm going to keep my toes on the ground for 10 minutes. First minute, and I'm like, this is stupid. Second minute, I'm like, come on. What could keeping my toes on the ground have to do with anything? 4 minutes in, I want to run. Where do I go? 6 minutes in, I'm nauseous. I feel like I want to throw up. I was like, whoa, all of that just from keeping my toes on the ground and not lifting them up once. It's like, wow, I haven't done this in decades. So this is part of the cinesomatic stuff where there's just all these embodiment things that we do, we don't do, and it's this, just a couple little tweaks like that sometimes can just shift our energy. So that's something that you can try playing with if you'd like, or not. It's fine. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for joining. I had a lot of fun today. I hope this was insightful and helpful. And if you know anybody that would have fun here and bring some value and could use some help, welcome to invite them to the school group. And if you have more questions, post them. I'll see if I can transfer them over from the other thing. But post some more questions. We'll see you next, I think next week. I'll update on the calendar if not.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll see you next week. The following week, not on Thursday, but we'll see you next week.
Okay.
Thank
Bye.
you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a great night.